All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're tackling one of the biggest questions you can possibly ask. What is reality actually made of? What's the fundamental stuff of the universe?
I mean, seriously, just take a second. Look around you. The chair you're sitting on, the device you're watching this on, your own hands. They feel solid, right? They feel real. That gut feeling that the world is made of actual concrete stuff is probably the most basic experience we all share.
And this wasn't just common sense. For literally thousands of years, this was the absolute bedrock of Western thought. We're talking from Aristotle all the way to Newton. The idea that reality is built from some kind of stable, fundamental substance, well, that was the starting point for everything. It was undisputed.
But what if it's all just an illusion? What if that deep-seated feeling, that certainty that the world is made of solid things, is just fundamentally wrong?
Because that's pretty much exactly what happened. The revolutions in physics in the 20th century, man, they didn't just tweak our understanding. They took a sledgehammer to the entire foundation of reality. Suddenly, our deepest gut feelings were in a head-on collision with our best science, and that collision left us in what we can only call a substance crisis.
Okay, so to really get just how deep this crisis goes, we've got to first understand the world that got shattered. So let's take a look at that classical common sense picture of reality.
So, in the old school view, especially from Aristotle and the folks who followed him, a substance was the real underlying stuff that an object was made of. And its most basic property? Well, it was just that it took up space. It had extension, length, width, and depth. That's what made something a physical thing.
And they thought this substance had two parts. First, you had matter. But hold on, this isn't matter like we think of it today. It was more like pure passive potential. Imagine a lump of clay, just a formless blob that can't be anything on its own. Then you had the form. This was the actual blueprint, the idea that shaped the clay and made it into something specific. A statue, a pot, a person. So the key takeaway here is that in this old view, matter itself was actually the weakest, most passive part of reality.
And for centuries, this model just worked. It made sense of the world. But then, the early 20th century rolled around, and the first major cracks started to show up in that solid foundation. And it all started with 5 little characters. Einstein's famous equation was the first real knockout punch. See, in the old view, mass was the fundamental, unchangeable property of matter. But E equals mc squared showed that, nope, mass isn't fundamental at all. It's really just a super concentrated form of energy. Now this was a really tough pill to swallow. Physicists and philosophers pretty much immediately started arguing about what this equation really meant. Are mass and energy literally the exact same thing? Or are they just two different things that can, turn into each other? The very definition of matter was suddenly completely up for grabs. And then the plot got even thicker. Relativity didn't just knock mass off its pedestal. It introduced an idea that was, it was complete nonsense to the old way of thinking. A particle with no matter at all? Let me introduce you to the photon, the particle of light. So experiments proved it has zero rest mass. For the old school physicists, this was a flat-out contradiction. But relativity came to the rescue. It turns out a massless particle can have energy and momentum with one condition. It has to always be moving at the speed of light. And that was it. That was the final nail in the coffin. Matter wasn't the fundamental substance of reality anymore. It was just a property, a feature that something might have, or it might not. So if Einstein's relativity put some serious cracks in the foundation, the next big thing, quantum field theory, was about to come along and just vaporize the whole building. And this, right here, is the absolute heart of it all. The old view saw the world as being made of things, tiny little billiard balls we call particles. Quantum field theory, or QFT, completely flips that on its head. In QFT, the most fundamental thing in reality isn't an object, it's a field. Think of it like a giant, invisible ocean that fills all of space. What we call a particle is nothing more than a little ripple, a little vibration in that ocean. All of a sudden, the world isn't made of stuff anymore. It's made of actions, of processes.
I mean, this new picture of reality is just as profound as it is weird. As one source puts it so well, if you could zoom in far, far enough, you wouldn't find tiny bits of matter. You'd just find this one unified sea of energy and vibrations. And isn't it crazy how this cutting-edge physics starts to sound a whole lot like those ancient mystical ideas about the underlying unity of everything?
Okay,
So we've gone from a solid world of things to this shimmering, vibrating reality of processes and fields. It's confusing, right? It feels like we're totally lost in this bizarre new landscape. But what if I told you that the map we need to navigate this new reality was actually drawn hundreds of years ago?
This is where things get really fascinating. Because the philosophical language we need, the perfect words to describe this 21st century physics, might just have been created way back in the 17th century by a Persian philosopher named Mulla Sadra.
So, Mulla Sadra had this absolutely revolutionary idea called substantial motion. Remember how Aristotle insisted that the real substance of a thing had to be static and unchanging? Well, Sadra looked at that and said the exact opposite. He argued that the very essence, the true substance of a thing, is never static. It's in a constant state of flux, a non-stop process of becoming something else.
Think about it like this. For Aristotle, reality was all about static being. A chair's a chair, its substance is fixed. But for Sadra, reality was about dynamic becoming. The substance is the change itself. It's a continuous flow. And just like that, we have a philosophy based on processes, not objects. It's a perfect philosophical mirror for the world that quantum field theory describes.
Okay, so Sadra's philosophy gives us this incredible way to look at modern physics. But the story, of course, doesn't end there. The quantum crisis really forced everyone to scramble for answers, and honestly, that debate is still raging today.
You can basically break down the responses into three main camps. First, you've got the idealists who suggested that maybe reality isn't even real until someone, an observer, actually looks at it. Then you have others who kind of threw up their hands and said, look, we can never know what reality really is, we can only know what our experiments tell us. And then you had some who tried to save good old-fashioned realism with wild ideas like that spooky action at a distance that Einstein hated.
And all this confusion has led to some serious soul-searching inside the world of physics itself. You've got physicists like Sabine Hassenfelder who argue that the whole field has kind of lost its way, chasing these mathematically beautiful theories that have zero connection to actual experiments. From her point of view, the search for the ultimate substance has completely stalled out.
And then, looking from the outside in, you have philosophers like Thomas Nagel saying there's an even bigger problem. He argues that a purely materialistic view of the universe is, and I'm quoting him here, radically inadequate. And why is that? Well, because even if you had a perfect theory of everything, it would still leave out the most obvious thing in the entire universe, consciousness itself, the very mind that came up with the theory in the first place.
So you can really see the whole journey right here. Our idea of what substance is has just evolved like crazy. We went from static matter to dynamic energy to these process-based fields. And that just begs the ultimate question, what's next? A lot of smart people are now suggesting the next big leap will be to see information, or maybe even consciousness itself, as the real foundation of it all.
And this is where it all comes full circle, in a really mind-bending way. See, for Mulla Sadra, the highest, most real level of existence was pure consciousness, pure awareness. So as our best science today dissolves solid stuff into pure process, and as it keeps slamming into the hard problem of consciousness, you just have to ask yourself, are we simply rediscovering a very old truth? Could it be that the ultimate substance of reality is the very thing that's asking the question? Could it be consciousness itself?